Imagine standing at the edge of a grand museum, the kind with marble floors that echo every step and chandeliers that glitter like 1,000 tiny stars. You're holding an invitation to the event of the year, a night meant to honor heroes. But the guy at the door looks you up and down, smirks and says you don't belong. That's exactly what happened to Samuel Harmon, a 75-year-old man with a story most people couldn't even dream of. His faded brown bomber jacket, worn thin from years of use, didn't scream VIP to the young event coordinator blocking his way. But what that coordinator didn't know, what the whole room of fancy guests sipping champagne didn't realize, was that Sam wasn't just some old guy who wandered in off the street. He was a walking piece of history, a Korean War veteran whose quiet life hid a past that could bring that glittering gala to its knees. Tonight we're diving into a story about respect, judgment, and what it really means to be a hero. It's a tale that starts with a single moment of humiliation, but ends with a truth so powerful it stopped an entire event dead in its tracks. So grab a seat, because you're not going to believe what happened next. Picture this. It's a chilly evening, and the City Museum is buzzing with energy. The Night of Heroes Gala is in full swing, a black tie affair packed with wealthy donors, military bigwigs, and local celebrities. The air smells like expensive perfume and polished leather, and waiters glide through the crowd with trays of sparkling drinks. Everyone's here to celebrate veterans, to unveil a new exhibit about the Korean War, a conflict that feels like a distant memory to most of the people in that room. But for Sam Harmon, it's not just history. It's the weight he's carried for decades, etched into the lines on his face and the slight limp in his step. Sam lives alone in a small apartment, getting by on a modest pension and fixing things for neighbors to make ends meet. He's not the type to talk about himself. His most treasured possession? A tarnished medal tucked away in a shoebox under his bed, next to faded letters and photos of friends who never made it home. He spends his days volunteering at the VA hospital, listening to others' stories because that's what he's always done. Listened, remembered, and carried on. Sam didn't even want to come to this gala. Big events like this with their fancy clothes and fake smiles aren't his thing. But a few months ago, he'd met Dr. Eris Thorne, the curator of the museum's new exhibit. Dr. Thorne had been researching the Korean War and tracked Sam down, asking for his memories to help make the display authentic. Sam shared just enough. Careful stories about the freezing nights at the chosen reservoir, about the men he fought beside, about the moments he'd rather forget. Dr. Thorne was so moved that he sent Sam a handwritten invitation, insisting he attend the gala. "Your story matters," the note said. So, Sam dug out his best trousers, a clean shirt, and that old bomber jacket, the same one he wore through those brutal winters in Korea. He figured it was good enough. Clutching the worn envelope with the invitation, he walked up to the museum's gleaming doors, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses spilling out into the night. He wasn't expecting a red carpet, but he also wasn't expecting what came next. At the check-in table, a young guy named Ethan, the event coordinator, stood like a gatekeeper. His name tag gleamed under the lobby's lights, and his sharp tuxedo screamed authority. When Sam handed over his invitation, Ethan barely glanced at it. His eyes flicked over Sam's jacket, his worn shoes, his age, and something in his face tightened. "Samuel Harmon? I don't see you on the main guest list," he said, his voice polite but cold. He tapped his tablet, then looked Sam up and down again. "Are you with catering? Maintenance, maybe?" The words hit like a slap, but Sam stayed calm, his voice steady. "No, I was invited by Dr. Thorne for the exhibit." Ethan raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "This is a black tie event, sir. Jacket and tie are required. That bomber jacket, it's not appropriate." A few guests nearby turned to stare, their whispers cutting through the hum of the crowd. Sam felt the weight of their eyes, the kind of judgment he'd faced too many times before. He could have walked away right then, faded back into the shadows where he felt more at home. But something kept him there, rooted by the velvet rope that separated him from the gala. Ethan wasn't done. Leaning in, his voice low but sharp, he said, "Frankly, you don't look like you belong here. We have standards to maintain." The words hung in the air, heavy with condescension. Sam's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just stepped back, clutching that envelope a little tighter, and moved to the edge of the lobby. From there, he could see glimpses of the exhibit, black and white photos of soldiers in the snow, display cases with artifacts, the kind of history he didn't need a museum to remember. One photo caught his eye. A group of young men, exhausted, huddled together in a frozen landscape. He knew those faces. That cold. It was like staring into a mirror of his past. The crowd didn't notice him standing there, a ghost among their glitter, but Sam didn't care. He was used to being invisible. Still, he couldn't shake the sting of Ethan's words or the feeling that maybe he didn't belong. Not here. Not anywhere like this. As the minutes ticked by, Sam stood quietly, debating whether to leave. He'd wait just a little longer, he decided, for Dr. Thorne. If the curator didn't show, he'd slip out, no fuss, just another quiet retreat. But then the museum doors spun open, and everything changed. A man strode in, tall and commanding, his dress uniform gleaming with 4 silver stars on each shoulder. General Marcus Thorne, a legend in military circles, was the Gala's guest of honor. The room paused, conversations fading as eyes turned to him. He scanned the lobby, nodding briefly at the museum director rushing to greet him. But then his gaze landed on Sam, standing alone by the velvet rope, and something shifted. The general's face lit up with recognition, then respect, and he changed course, heading straight for the old man in the faded jacket. The crowd watched, confused. Ethan froze, his tablet forgotten. Sam looked up, surprised, as the general stopped in front of him and snapped a crisp salute. "Sergeant Major Harmon," the general said, his voice carrying through the silent lobby. "It's an honor to see you here tonight, sir." What did General Thorne know about Sam that the rest of the room didn't? Why was a 4-star general saluting an old man in a worn jacket? And what was about to happen that would bring this entire gala crashing down? Stick around, because this story's about to take a turn you won't see coming. The museum lobby stood frozen, every eye locked on General Marcus Thorne as he saluted Samuel Harmon, a 75-year-old veteran in a faded bomber jacket who'd just been told he didn't belong. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. Sam returned the salute, his hand steady but his eyes wide with surprise. He hadn't seen Marcus Thorne in years, not since their paths crossed in the brutal cold of the Korean War's chosen reservoir. Back then, Marcus was a young lieutenant, green and nervous, and Sam was the grizzled sergeant who kept him alive. Now here they were, decades later, one a 4-star general dripping with medals, the other a quiet old man clutching a worn invitation. The crowd didn't know their history, but they could feel the weight of it. Ethan, the event coordinator, stood behind his check-in table, his face pale, his tablet forgotten in his hand. He'd just dismissed Sam like he was nobody, and now a general was calling him sir. The Night of Heroes Gala, meant to honor veterans, was about to unravel, and the tension in the room was electric. What was General Thorne about to do, and how was this moment going to change everything? Sam's mind flickered back to that invitation from Dr. Eris Thorne, the curator who'd spent hours listening to his stories about the Korean War. Dr. Thorne wasn't related to the general, but he'd been relentless, showing up at Sam's tiny apartment with a notebook and a recorder, asking about the battles, the cold, the men who didn't come back. Sam hadn't wanted to talk. Those memories were locked tight, like the metal in his shoebox. But Dr. Thorne's quiet respect had worn him down. He'd shared just enough. The way the snow stung like needles, the sound of gunfire that never seemed to stop, the way he'd carried wounded men through a frozen hell to safety. Dr. Thorne had used those stories to build the museum's new exhibit, even basing the centerpiece map on Sam's old field sketches. That invitation wasn't just a polite gesture. It was a plea for Sam to see his own history honored. But standing there by the velvet rope, humiliated by Ethan's sharp words, Sam wondered if he'd made a mistake coming. The gala's glitz felt like a mockery of the gritty reality he'd lived through. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He was 28, ambitious and obsessed with making this gala perfect. His job at the museum was his big break, a chance to rub shoulders with the city's elite. He'd spent weeks planning every detail, table settings, lighting, even the exact shade of the tablecloths. The dress code was his line in the sand, a way to keep the event exclusive, polished, worthy of the museum's reputation. When he saw Sam's worn jacket and weathered face, he'd assumed the old man was a mistake, someone who'd slipped through the cracks. Now, with General Thorne staring down at him, Ethan felt the ground shifting. "General, sir," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know who he was, the guest list and the dress code. It's museum policy." General Thorne's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. "Policy?" he said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut glass. "You think policy matters more than the man standing in front of you? This is Sergeant Major Samuel Harmon. He saved my life. He saved dozens of lives. And you're telling him he can't come in because of his jacket?" The crowd was whispering now, their champagne glasses forgotten. A woman in a glittering gown nudged her husband, her eyes wide with curiosity. A young veteran in dress blues, standing near the exhibit entrance, clenched his fists, his face a mix of anger and pride as he watched the scene unfold. Maria, the intern who'd spoken kindly to Sam earlier, hovered nearby, her heart racing. She'd only been at the museum a few weeks, but she'd heard Dr. Thorne talk about a special guest whose stories shaped the exhibit. Could this be him? She wanted to speak up, to tell Ethan he was wrong, but fear of losing her internship kept her quiet. Still, she couldn't look away from Sam, standing tall despite the weight of the moment. His bomber jacket, faded and worn, seemed to carry more honor than Ethan's pristine tuxedo. The lobby felt like a powder keg, and General Thorne was holding the match. Back in his apartment, Sam had almost thrown out Dr. Thorne's invitation. He didn't like attention, didn't trust crowds or fancy events. But something about the note, the way it said, "Your story matters," had stirred him. He thought of his old platoon, the men in those black and white photos now hanging in the exhibit. He thought of the promises he'd made to remember them, to carry their stories, even when the world moved on. So he'd come, not for himself but for them. Now, standing in the lobby, he felt that old promise tested. Ethan's words, "You don't look like you belong here," echoed the doubts he'd buried long ago. Had he been wrong to come? Was his place really out here, on the edges, invisible to the world? He glanced at the exhibit again, catching sight of that map, the one he'd drawn in the dark with frozen fingers. It was his, even if no one in that room knew it. He straightened his shoulders, his resolve hardening. He'd wait for Dr. Thorne, just a little longer. General Thorne, though, wasn't waiting. His voice rose, carrying through the lobby like a battlefield command. "This man," he said, pointing to Sam, "is the reason we're here tonight. He fought in the chosen reservoir, dragged me and 2 others out of an ambush while bleeding from his own wounds. He didn't care about medals or glory. He cared about his men. And you." He turned to Ethan, his eyes blazing. "You think a dress code matters more than that?" The crowd gasped, some stepping closer, others shrinking back. The museum director, a nervous man in a tailored suit, pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "General, please, there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice shaking. "We'll fix this immediately." But General Thorne wasn't looking at him. He was looking at Sam, his expression softening for a moment. "Sam, you shouldn't be out here by the ropes. You belong inside, front and center." Ethan's hands trembled as he tried to salvage the situation. "Sir, I was just following protocol. The main guest list didn't include him, and the attire—" General Thorne cut him off with a single raised hand. "You don't get it, son. This isn't about your list. This is about respect. This man's story is the heart of that exhibit, and you turned him away because he doesn't fit your idea of important." The general's voice dropped, cold and final. "I'm the guest of honor here, and I say this gala doesn't deserve him or me." He turned to his aides, who stood ready at the entrance. "Pack it up. We're done here." The crowd erupted in murmurs, shock rippling through the room. The museum director looked like he might faint. Ethan's face was ashen, his career flashing before his eyes. Maria, the intern, took a step forward, her voice small but clear. Dr. Thorne's on his way. He's been looking for Mr. Harmon. All eyes turned to the exhibit entrance where a figure was hurrying toward them. Was this the moment everything would change, or would it all fall apart? The museum lobby was a storm of whispers and wide eyes as Dr. Eris Thorne, the curator, hurried through the exhibit entrance, his face flushed with urgency. He'd been stuck in a back room, finalizing details for the Korean War exhibit, unaware of the chaos unfolding at the check-in table. Now, seeing General Marcus Thorne standing beside Samuel Harmon, the old veteran in the faded bomber jacket, Dr. Thorne's heart sank. "Sergeant Major Harmon," he called, pushing past a cluster of stunned guests. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were here." Sam, still standing by the velvet rope, gave a small nod, his expression calm but guarded. General Thorne's gaze was still locked on Ethan, the event coordinator, whose face was now a sickly shade of white. The general's words, "This Gala doesn't deserve him," hung in the air like a verdict. The Night of Heroes Gala, meant to celebrate veterans, was teetering on the edge of collapse, and the tension was so thick you could feel it pressing against your chest. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if Dr. Thorne's arrival would save the night or seal its fate. Dr. Thorne reached Sam, his hands trembling as he clutched a folder of notes. "This is my fault," he said, his voice shaking. "I invited Sergeant Major Harmon personally. His stories, his sketches, they're the heart of this exhibit. I meant for him to be our honored guest." He turned to Ethan, his eyes flashing with rare anger. "You had no right to stop him. None." Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The museum director, still hovering nearby, stepped forward, his voice desperate. "General Dr. Thorne, please, let's fix this. Mr. Harmon, you're welcome inside. Right now, front and center." But General Thorne shook his head, his four-star presence unyielding. "It's too late for that," he said, his voice booming through the lobby. "This event was supposed to honor heroes, but you've dishonored one of the greatest men I know. Sergeant Major Harmon didn't just fight in the Korean War. He carried men to safety, men like me, through hell itself. You judged him by his jacket instead of his character. This gala is done." The crowd gasped, some clutching their pearls, others nodding in quiet agreement. Maria, the intern, watched with wide eyes, her heart pounding with a mix of awe and fear. The stakes couldn't be higher. Would the general really shut down the entire event? Sam, quiet through it all, felt a familiar ache in his chest. He didn't want this. A spectacle, a fight. He'd come to honor his fallen friends, not to tear down a celebration. But as he looked at General Thorne, then at Dr. Thorne's pleading eyes, he saw something else. A chance to stand for every veteran who'd ever been overlooked, every hero dismissed because they didn't fit the mold. He cleared his throat, his voice low but steady. "General, I appreciate you standing up for me, but I didn't come here for a fuss. I came for them," he said, nodding toward the exhibit, where black and white photos of soldiers stared back from the walls. "Those men in there, they're the heroes. I just want to see their story told right." The lobby fell silent. Sam's words cutting through the noise like a blade. Even Ethan, still frozen behind his table, looked down, shame creeping into his expression. General Thorne's stern face softened, and he placed a hand on Sam's shoulder. "You're right, Sam. Let's do this the way it should have been done." Without another word, General Thorne unhooked the velvet rope and gestured for Sam to walk with him. Dr. Thorne fell in step, and the three men moved toward the exhibit, the crowd parting like a sea. Ethan watched, helpless, as the museum director hissed at him to stay out of the way. Maria, the intern, followed at a distance, her notebook clutched tight, determined to witness what happened next. Inside the exhibit hall, the air was quieter, the lights softer, casting a glow over the displays. Sam's eyes landed on the map, the one based on his sketches from the chosen reservoir, drawn in the dark while bullets flew. Dr. Thorne pointed to it, his voice thick with emotion. "This is yours, Sergeant Major, every line, every detail. You brought this battle to life for us." Sam stared, his throat tight. He saw the faces of his platoon in his mind, young men who never got to grow old. For the first time that night, he felt like he belonged. But back in the lobby, the gala was falling apart. General Thorne's aides were already relaying orders, and the honor guard began packing their colors. Guests murmured in confusion, some grabbing their coats, others arguing with staff. The museum director was on his phone, frantically trying to salvage the situation, but the damage was done. General Thorne's words had exposed a truth no one could ignore. This event, with its champagne and tuxedos, had failed to honor the very people it claimed to celebrate. The young veteran in dress blues, who'd been watching silently, approached Maria. "That old man," he said quietly. "He's the real deal, isn't he?" Maria nodded, her eyes shining. "Yeah, and I think everyone's about to realize it." As word of the general's decision spread, the local media caught wind and reporters began gathering outside, their cameras flashing through the museum's glass doors. The Night of Heroes was no longer just a gala, it was a scandal. For Sam, though the world outside the exhibit hall faded away, General Thorne and Dr. Thorne guided him through the displays, pausing at each photo, each artifact. Sam spoke softly, sharing memories he'd kept locked away for decades. The freezing nights, the friends he'd lost, the moment he'd dragged a wounded Marcus Thorne to safety. Dr. Thorne scribbled notes, his respect for Sam growing with every word. General Thorne, usually so stoic, listened with a quiet intensity, his eyes distant with his own memories. By the time they reached the end of the exhibit, Sam felt lighter, like he'd laid down a burden he'd carried too long. "Thank you," he said simply, looking at both men. "This means something." General Thorne smiled, a rare warmth in his face. "No, Sam, thank you. For everything." The fallout was swift. The next morning, headlines screamed, "General shuts down Gala over disrespect to war hero." Ethan was quietly let go, his dreams of a big career crushed under the weight of his mistake. The museum issued a public apology, promising better training and outreach for veterans. Donations poured in, many earmarked for the Korean War exhibit, now a symbol of Sam's quiet heroism. Sam himself stayed out of the spotlight, declining interviews but accepting a private apology from the museum director. Back in his small apartment, life went on. He kept volunteering at the VA, fixing neighbors' broken lamps, drinking coffee with General Thorne when he visited. But something had changed. His neighbors looked at him differently, with a quiet respect. The local VFW welcomed him, offering a camaraderie he hadn't felt in years. And that tarnished medal? He finally put it on a shelf where it caught the light. This story isn't just about one night or one man. It's about what we value: fancy clothes or real courage, appearances or character. Sam Harmon didn't need a tuxedo to prove his worth. His life, his sacrifices did that for him. And when the world tried to push him aside, one general's voice and one veteran's quiet strength reminded everyone what honor really means. So, next time you see someone who doesn't fit the mold, take a second look. You might be standing next to a hero,